Hello, world history students. This is Mr. Everton. As you can tell, I have Zoom up in the background because on the screen it says I'm muted, but that's fine. This is a video all about continuity and change over time in the early modern period. We're going to be focusing at belief systems. On belief systems? Yeah. Belief systems also means religion. I want you to take notes on this lecture and think about the continuities and changes for Islam and Christianity that are described. All of this is taking place in the early modern period, which is 1450 to 1750. On the left, you see here a picture of the Hagia Sophia, which is a huge building in Istanbul. Originally, it was an Orthodox cathedral and a center of the Orthodox Christian Church, but when the Ottomans took over Constantinople and changed the name to Istanbul, they converted it into a mosque. And then on the right, you can see a picture of Martin Luther, the man most associated with the Protestant Reformation. We're going to be talking about Islam and Christianity and how they changed. I will also just take a moment and, because I'm the realist teacher that you have, I am dragging today. So I'm going to try to keep the energy up in this video. But my 5-year-old and my cat conspired to wake me up at 3 o'clock in the morning last night. Never let me go back to sleep. And there just isn't enough coffee. There's not enough. So we're going to start off in Southwest Asia, which is the Islamic world, part of the Islamic world, because as you know, Islam has now spread outside of the Middle East to other parts of the world, including South Asia, Southeast Asia, and West Africa, and North Africa. I want to remind you about the Sunni-Shia split. So while the Prophet Muhammad was alive, there was no divide in Islam. But when he died, there was a disagreement over who should be his successor, or the caliph. Caliph means successor. And so for the Sunni, who are the majority of Muslims, they believed that the successor to the Prophet should be any deserving Muslim. They just want to pick the best person, right? The most devout, the most pious, the person best cut out for the job. And so in their minds, that was a friend of the Prophet whose name was Abu Bakr. Now, the minority of Muslims were the Shia, and they believed that the successor needed to be related to the Prophet Muhammad. They needed to have Muhammad's blood in them. And so for them, the only logical choice for a successor to Prophet Muhammad was Ali, who was the Prophet's cousin and also his son-in-law. And so the divide between Sunni and Shia is much more complicated than this, but it really originated with this divide over who would be the successor to the Prophet. Ali did end up becoming the fourth caliph, but Shiite Muslims do not accept the legitimacy of the first three caliphs, Abu Bakr, Omar, and Uthman. And they also have different ideas about how Sharia law should be interpreted, and they have religious leaders called imams, who Sunnis have imams, but they're not as important. And in Shia Islam, the imams take on a lot more significance. So, that's a very basic description of the religious differences. But during this time period, so at the beginning of this time period, at the beginning of the early modern period, we have the Ottoman Empire and the Safavid Empire taking shape. So the Ottoman Empire is Sunni. And they, as you can see, have a very large, diverse empire that includes the southeastern part of Europe, where there are many Christians living. There are also many Jewish people living in this area. It includes Egypt, includes Mecca and Medina on the coast of the Arabian Peninsula. So because they have so many different kinds of people living in their diverse empire, the Sunni practice religious tolerance. They allow people with different religious beliefs to practice their religion and to, live their lives within the empire without really, messing with them too much, as long as they pay their taxes and do what they're supposed to do. On the other hand, the Safavid Empire, which takes shape in what is the modern-day country of Iran, they are devout Shia Muslims. And they use Shia Islam to unify the Safavid Empire and to create a national identity that all people living within the empire will belong to. This is contributing to their, they're taking on the legacy of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire predates Islam, and it was in the Islamic world. Persia was thought of as being like an incredibly literary place, a place with a lot of learning and prestige, and like to speak Persian was sort of, that's like the the language of the Eastern Islamic world. And they practiced Shia Islam, so the Safavids did too. And they became incredibly intolerant of non-Shia Muslims, either banishing them, forcing them to convert, or killing them. So that's what Islam looks like at the beginning of the period. Sunni and Shia, two different empires developing next to each other. As the period goes on, the Ottomans and the Safavids begin to have more and more of a political rivalry. Here you can see the most famous Ottoman ruler, Suleiman the Magnificent, leading an army against the Safavids. And the Ottomans and the Safavids would periodically attack each other, would have periodic battles and wars and raids against each other. And this would intensify the divide between Sunni Islam and Shia Islam. So, they already weren't necessarily getting along really well, but now they're starting to really not get along because they are associated with these two different empires that are fighting each other for control of Southwest Asia. So as this happens, and by the way, I see the typo there, apologies. As this happens, Sunni Islam becomes less religiously tolerant. The Ottomans had been religiously tolerant, but Sunni Muslims start to feel the need to sort of, in the face of Shia Islam pushing back against them, they feel the need to become more pure and more observant and more pious in the way that they practice their own religious beliefs. So both Sunni and Shia become more conservative, more focused on their own traditions, more focused on trying to get back to a more basic and original interpretation of the Quran and the revelation of Islam. And they become less tolerant of people who disagree with them. And then this leads to a new sect of Islam called Wahhabism. This calligraphy that you see here, this Arabic calligraphy, spells the name Al-Wahhab, and he was the founder of Wahhabism in the 18th century, which is the 1700s. Wahhabism is closely associated with Saudi Arabia. The Saudi princes, as they started to come to power in the Arabian Peninsula, worked closely with Al-Wahhab, and they sort of formed a pact together that the Saudi princes would be the political power and that Al-Wahhab would be like the religious leader. And this was an extremely conservative sect of Islam that believed that Islam had sort of lost its way and that it was very important to return to the teachings of Prophet Muhammad as they were, understood earlier. That and this is a branch of Sunni Islam. So they believe that Shia Muslims are illegitimate and that they are not actual Muslims. They rebelled against the Ottomans, who they thought the Ottomans weren't practicing Islam correctly either. And there was a rebellion in the Arabian Peninsula, which eventually was put down. And, Wahhabism stopped spreading for a while, but it did not disappear. And it continues unto this day in the Arabian Peninsula. The country of Saudi Arabia, and I believe Qatar, and a few other countries on the Arabian Peninsula are associated with this sect of Islam, Wahhabism. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears, and we're going to talk about Europe. Europe! Yeah, I'm feeling punchy, man. I'm telling you, not enough coffee. Europe! At the start of the early modern period, Europe is Catholic. They have been Catholic since, throughout the Middle Ages. Europe was becoming more and more Catholic, and that means that the Pope is maybe, the most powerful person in all of Europe. He's the ultimate religious authority with the ability to. He's collecting money in the form of tithes from the people of Europe. There's a hierarchical organization of bishops and cardinals and local clergy who all fit into this hierarchy with the Pope at the top. And according to Catholic beliefs, only Catholic clergy are able to interpret the Bible. The Bible is written in Latin. And if you want to understand what's going on in the Bible, you have to go to the local parish priest or some other Catholic clergyman in order to have them interpret the Bible for you. There are no female priests. There are nuns, but there are no female priests, and male priests, the only priests there are not allowed to get married. They are celibate. And also during this time period, the Catholic Church begins to sell indulgences which are basically letters that say this person is allowed to sin. Like, we're going to forgive their sins in advance. So like if you wanted to like go get into some mischief, you could go give money to the church and get a letter of indulgence, which would say that you would not go to hell for that because you have repented in advance by giving the church money. This is Pope Alexander VI, who a moment ago I told you that clergy are supposed to be celibate. Alexander was not celibate. Alexander had lots of kids by different baby mamas. Is that offensive? I mean, it's true, though. He had lots of baby mamas. It's just how it was. And he lived a very decadent, fancy lifestyle. He was not poor, which, you know, if you remember the early teachings of Christianity, Jesus said that people are supposed to be poor. So this opens the Catholic Church up to charges that it is deviating from the true teachings of Jesus Christ, and that the Catholic Church is corrupt. So this leads to Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther believed that the church had lost its way. He didn't like the indulgences. He didn't like the corruption. He didn't like all the wealth that he saw on display. And so he wrote up a document called the 95 Theses and tacked it to a church door in his hometown of Wittenberg, which is in Germany, you know. And this touched off the beginning of the Protestant Reformation, where many people heard what Luther had to say and agreed with him, and people began to push back against the Catholic Church and push back against the idea that the Catholic Church was the only kind of Christianity that there should be, and people began to form new ideas about Christianity and individuals being able to interpret the Bible and the teachings of Christianity for themselves without having the clergy involved. In response to this, the Catholic Church had what we call the Catholic Reformation, which there's a number of different aspects to it, but they had a series of meetings called the Council of Trent, where they issued some reforms. They changed the way they did the indulgences thing, but they reasserted that the Catholic Church has control of religious doctrine, and that only the Catholic Church can interpret the Bible, and that Luther is a heretic, that Luther is teaching a false version of Christianity. As more and more people began to follow Martin Luther and adapt his version of Christianity, you end up with Protestants who believe, you end up with two different sects of Christianity, right? You have Catholicism and you have Protestantism, and you have different countries becoming Protestant, and this leads to something called the 30 Years' War, which was fought between Protestants and Catholics. It was an incredibly bloody affair indeed. So by the end of this period, you can see a redrawn map of Europe after the Reformation. We still have the Catholic Church that is incredibly important and is dominating large parts of Europe, but now you have new sects, new Protestant sects of Christianity, including Lutheranism, including Calvinism, Anglicanism, which is the Church of England, and Anabaptists. And so all of these new forms of Christianity emerged in response to what was seen as the corruption of the Catholic Church. So what I would like you to do now that I've talked a whole lot, and you've hopefully been taking notes, I want you to look over your notes, and on the next slide, I want you to create a bullet point list of the continuities that you see in Islam and the changes you see in Islam, of the continuities you see in Christianity and the changes you see in Christianity. So go ahead and do that now, and then you're going to use your bullet point list to generate a thesis paragraph about the continuities and change in religious beliefs during the early modern period. Whew, that was a lot of talking. I hope I didn't put you to sleep. I'm sure I didn't, because continuities and changes in religious beliefs, that's some hard-hitting stuff. I'm sure you were on the edge of your seat.